Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourself now, because something truly crazy just happened. And when I say crazy, I don't mean random or accidental. I mean the kind of event that shakes the very foundations of our economy and politics, the kind that exposes how fragile and unequal our system really is. The headlines may sound sensational, but behind the noise lies a story that we all must take seriously, because it affects your job, your home, your paycheck, and your future, certainly. Here's a **600 word expanded version of key point 1 ** written in a professional, engaging, and news and politics style with rhetorical hooks built in. When we talk about economic shockwaves today, we are not referring to some abstract financial trend tucked away in stock market reports. We are talking about real world tremors that ripple through the daily lives of millions of working people. The crazy part, the part that should make us all stop and ask, how is this possible, is that while corporations are reporting record-breaking profits, the wages of ordinary workers remain stagnant, flatlining in a way that leaves households struggling to keep pace with even the most basic costs of living. Imagine for a moment that a company announces billions in quarterly profits. Executives walk away with multi-million-dollar bonuses, and yet the very employees who produced that wealth are still debating whether they can afford groceries, rent, or their children's school supplies. That is not just unfair, it is unsustainable. The numbers tell a story that should make headlines every day. Over the past decade, corporate profits have surged to levels unseen in modern history, particularly in industries like technology, pharmaceuticals, and finance. In the wake of the pandemic, while small businesses shuttered and families tightened their belts, the largest firms consolidated their market share and raised prices under the banner of supply chain challenges. Consumers were told to accept higher costs as inevitable, but what was less publicized was the fact that many corporations quietly boosted profit margins at the same time. What does it mean when inflation is hurting workers, but padding corporate balance sheets? It means the system is tilted, not by accident, but by design. Consider this hook. If workers' productivity has risen consistently for decades, why have wages not kept pace? The answer lies in the way our economy distributes gains. While productivity has soared, the lion's share of benefits has been captured by shareholders and executives, not the workers generating that value. This is the silent theft of modern capitalism, one that doesn't show up in police reports, but shows up every month in paychecks that no longer stretch to cover the cost of living. The wealth being created in record amounts does not vanish into thin air. It flows upward, concentrating power and money in fewer hands while hollowing out the economic security of the majority. The human cost of these shockwaves is staggering. Workers across industries, teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, retail clerks, face mounting stress as they juggle multiple jobs just to make ends meet. They are not asking for luxuries, they are asking for dignity. Yet, even as their voices grow louder, the narrative we hear from policymakers is that wage increases are dangerous because they fuel inflation. But notice the hypocrisy. Record profits and executive pay hikes are not blamed for rising prices, only the modest raises that workers demand. This is not economics. This is politics dressed up in economic language, and it exposes the priorities of a system that protects the top while disciplining the bottom. To drive the point home, think about this contradiction. If the economy is truly booming, as headlines often claim, then why are so many people falling behind? The crazy truth is that growth, in today's terms, often refers to corporate earnings, not to household stability. A booming stock market does not pay for a family's health care, a child's education, or a worker's rent. Yet we continue to use these elite benchmarks as if they reflect the health of the entire society. They do not. They are mirrors of inequality, reflecting only the winners of the current system. And still, people are told to be grateful for jobs, even when those jobs come without security, without benefits, and without wages that keep pace with inflation. It is as if the bar for what counts as success has been lowered so drastically that mere survival is presented as an achievement. Meanwhile, the wealthy accumulate fortunes so vast that they cannot possibly spend them in a dozen lifetimes. What kind of economic logic defends a system where one CEO annual bonus could pay the salaries of thousands of workers? Yet those same workers are told the company cannot afford higher pay. That is not logic, that is ideology, carefully maintained to preserve the status quo. The shockwaves we are living through, then, are not accidental earthquakes of the economy. They are deliberate outcomes of choices made in boardrooms and legislative halls. And here is the hook that must stay with you. Every time you see a headline about record profits, you should ask yourself, who paid the price for that success? Because behind every glowing corporate report is a workforce that is not sharing in the prosperity it created. That imbalance is the real story, the one too rarely told, but the one we cannot afford to ignore. Here's a **600 word expansion of key point 2 ** in a professional news and politics style with hooks, written in smooth paragraph form. When we talk about political double standards, we are really talking about the architecture of power itself, who it serves, who it protects, and who it abandons. The crazy part, the part that should make us all pause, is how brazenly these double standards play out in plain sight. Time and again, when crises hit, governments find billions, sometimes trillions, of dollars to cushion corporations, bail out banks, and stabilize markets. But when ordinary people face rising rents, crumbling schools, or medical bills they cannot pay, suddenly we are told there is no money, that budgets are tight, and that sacrifices must be made. The question writes itself: why is there always enough for the powerful, but never enough for the public? Look at the record. In financial crashes, the government moved swiftly to provide lifelines to Wall Street, even guaranteeing survival for firms whose own reckless decisions caused the collapse. In moments of economic uncertainty, subsidies flow to oil companies, defense contractors, and pharmaceutical giants with barely a debate. Yet when workers demand fair wages, or when communities demand affordable housing, the response is a wall of excuses. We are told such investments would be too expensive or fiscally irresponsible. This is not a neutral economic principle. This is a political choice that reveals whose interests are truly prioritized. Here's the hook. If taxpayer money can rescue billion-dollar corporations, why can't it guarantee health care for every citizen? If the public purse is deep enough to fund corporate tax breaks, why does it suddenly run dry when students plead for relief from crushing debt? The hypocrisy is breathtaking. It exposes a political culture where the rules bend for the few and harden against the many, and the most outrageous part is that this has been normalized. The people footing the bill, the workers, the consumers, the taxpayers, are expected to swallow the contradiction as if it were common sense. Take the case of subsidies. Fossil fuel companies, among the wealthiest enterprises on Earth, receive billions in public support each year. Meanwhile, renewable energy programs which could create jobs and address climate change are underfunded or obstructed. Why? Because political decisions are not neutral. They reflect the influence of industries with the deepest pockets and the strongest lobbying arms. The double standard is clear. When the interests of the powerful are at stake, government intervention is called stability or growth. But when the powerless ask for help, intervention is labeled handouts or dependency. The same act, spending public money, is painted as noble in one case and irresponsible in another. This plays out not only in economics, but in everyday life. A wealthy corporation can exploit loopholes, offshore profits, and receive favorable tax treatment. Yet a low-income worker who misses a bill payment is penalized with fees, interest, and mounting debt. A political elite can speak of shared sacrifice while enjoying privileges funded by the very people being asked to sacrifice. The rules are written one way for the top and another way for everyone else. This is not governance, it is management of inequality, carefully disguised as policy. Ask yourself this: why is student debt relief portrayed as a moral hazard but bank bailouts are portrayed as necessary. Why are food assistance programs scrutinized line by line, while defense budgets sail through with little question? The double standard is not subtle, it is glaring, and it points to a deeper truth. Politics, as it currently functions, is not about representing the will of the people. It is about safeguarding the interests of those already in power. That is why the same government that hesitates to raise the minimum wage will eagerly spend billions on contracts for corporations with close political ties. The effect of these double standards is not only material, but psychological. Citizens lose trust, feeling abandoned and betrayed, while elites reinforce their position with the assurance that no matter what happens, they will be protected. This erosion of trust feeds cynicism, disengagement, and anger. And here is the real danger. A society that believes the game is rigged will eventually stop playing by the rules. When people see that laws bend for the rich and snap against the poor, faith in democracy itself begins to collapse. That collapse is not just a political problem. It is a crisis of legitimacy. So the crazy thing, the truly shocking thing, is not that double standards exist. They have always existed, but that they are so normalized, so entrenched, that we barely recognize them as extraordinary anymore. We talk about bailouts as routine. We talk about corporate welfare as economic necessity. Meanwhile, the struggles of everyday people are treated as background noise. That normalization is the real scandal, the quiet acceptance of a system where fairness is promised but never delivered. And the more we accept it, the more it grows, until the double standard becomes the standard. Here's a **600 word expansion of key point 3 ** written in a professional, engaging, and news and politics style with rhetorical hooks woven in. When we speak about the surge in wealth inequality, we are not describing a gradual or natural trend. It is an explosion, one that has redefined the economic landscape in ways that should unsettle every citizen who still believes in fairness. The crazy part is how rapidly and how visibly this divide has widened, almost as if two separate economies now exist side by side. One for the wealthy elite, flush with privilege and opportunity, and another for the vast majority, left scrambling to survive. You can see it in the headlines, you can see it in the neighborhoods, and you can see it every time a billionaire adds another zero to their net worth while working families cut back on groceries to make rent. The numbers alone tell a story of imbalance bordering on absurdity. In just the past few years, the richest 1% of people captured more than half of all new wealth created globally, while the bottom half of humanity, billions of people, shared a fraction so small it barely registers on charts. Think about that for a moment as ordinary households struggle with rising prices, mounting debts, and stagnant wages. The ultra-wealthy are doubling their fortunes at breakneck speed. That is not a coincidence, and it is not simply the product of hard work. It is the result of a system structured to funnel resources upward, to reward ownership over labor, and to entrench privilege in ways that make mobility almost impossible. Here's the hook. How can a society call itself free or democratic when economic power is so heavily concentrated in the hands of so few? Wealth translates into influence over politics, media, culture, and even the framing of public debates. When billionaires fund political campaigns, own major media outlets, and dictate the terms of policy through lobbying, are we really talking about democracy? Or are we talking about an oligarchy wearing democratic clothing? The crazy truth is that inequality is not only about money, it is about power, and the way that power shapes every decision that affects the lives of ordinary people. The human consequences of this surge in inequality are devastating. Families forced to choose between paying medical bills or buying food are told to tighten their belts, while luxury real estate markets skyrocket with record sales. Young people drown in debt just to access an education, while the wealthy send their children to elite schools that guarantee lifelong connections and opportunity. Workers who clock in day after day, creating the profits that fuel corporate success, see no share of the wealth they produce, while CEO collect salaries and bonuses that exceed the lifetime earnings of entire communities. And yet the dominant narrative insists that this system is based on merit. But if merit truly determined outcomes, would a teacher struggling to afford rent earn less in a year than a hedge fund manager makes in an hour? The absurdity is compounded when crises hit. During the pandemic, for example, millions lost jobs and homes, while billionaire wealth soared by trillions. That is not just inequality, that is extraction on a global scale. The wealthy did not merely weather the storm, they used it to consolidate more power and more resources. Meanwhile, frontline workers, those deemed essential, were praised with words, but rarely compensated with wages that reflected their value. The double insult of being both exploited and ignored has deepened anger and disillusionment across society. Here's another hook. If inequality keeps rising, what happens to the very fabric of society? History gives us a warning. Societies that allow wealth gaps to widen unchecked eventually face unrest, instability, and collapse. Inequality is not just an economic issue, it is a political time bomb. When millions of people feel locked out of opportunity, when they sense that no matter how hard they work the system is rigged against them, frustration builds into fury. That fury can erupt in strikes, protests, or even revolutions. The wealthy may believe they are insulated in gated communities and corporate towers, but history proves otherwise. Inequality, left unchecked, destabilizes everyone. The most shocking part is how normalized this all has become. We watch billionaires launch themselves into space as if it were entertainment, while millions of families worry about keeping the lights on. We scroll past reports of record corporate profits, while communities line up at food banks. We celebrate the symbols of extreme wealth while ignoring the suffering those fortunes are built upon. That normalization is the true scandal. It dulls our outrage and convinces us that this imbalance is simply the way the world works. But make no mistake, the surge in inequality is not natural, it is manufactured, and it is maintained through deliberate policies that favor capital over labor, wealth over work, and elites over everyone else. Here's **600 word expansion of key point 4 ** written in a professional, engaging news and politics style with strong rhetorical hooks throughout. Public outrage is no longer a murmur in the background. It is becoming a roar that even the most insulated political and corporate elites can no longer ignore. The crazy part is not simply that people are angry. It is that their anger is rooted in a reality that is visible to everyone. Workers see their labor undervalued. Families see their living costs spiraling, while wages remain stagnant. And young people see their futures mortgaged before they even begin. Outrage is not coming from nowhere. It is a response to the widening gulf between the lives people are told they should be able to live and the lives they are actually enduring. And that gap is no longer a quiet grievance. It is spilling into the streets, into workplaces, into the heart of political debate. Think about the strikes spreading across industries once considered stable: education, healthcare, manufacturing, logistics. Nurses and doctors walk out not because they have stopped caring for patients, but because their dedication is being exploited, while hospital administrators pocket bonuses. Teachers march not because they dislike their profession, but because they are asked to do more with less every single year, while politicians funnel funds elsewhere. Delivery drivers, warehouse workers, and factory employees are refusing to remain silent as billion-dollar corporations squeeze them for every ounce of productivity without offering basic dignity in return. These strikes are not isolated events. They are linked by a common realization. The system as it stands is not working for the majority, and polite patience is no longer an option. Here's the hook. When ordinary people stop believing that the system will ever deliver fairness on its own, they stop waiting and start demanding. That demand can take many forms: unionization efforts, mass protests, grassroots campaigns, and together they are creating a new political energy. Politicians may dismiss this outrage as disruption or radicalism, but history shows us that every meaningful social change, from labor rights to civil rights, was once dismissed the same way. The crazy truth is that outrage has always been the fuel of progress. Without it, entrenched power never budges. Across the globe, we are seeing this outrage manifest in diverse but interconnected ways. Farmers protest trade deals that undermine their livelihoods. Students rally against debt burdens that shape their entire futures. Communities rise up against environmental destruction caused by corporations that profit while leaving behind poisoned water and polluted air. Each movement may seem localized, but together they form a chorus that asks the same fundamental question: whose side is government really on? When leaders appear more accountable to corporate donors than to the citizens who elected them, outrage is not only justified, it is inevitable. And here's another hook: outrage is not chaos, it is clarity. It is people recognizing the lie that has been sold to them for decades, that if they just work harder, sacrifice more, and stay quiet, their turn will come. That turn never comes, and people are realizing it. Outrage is clarity because it strips away the illusions and exposes the mechanics of inequality in their raw form. It says, enough is enough, we see what is happening, and we refuse to be complicit in our own exploitation. This rising outrage is also reshaping politics. Candidates who once would have been dismissed as too radical are now gaining traction precisely because they speak to the anger and frustration of ordinary people. Calls for wealth taxes, universal health care, and climate action are no longer fringe ideas. They are mainstream demands fueled by the lived experiences of millions. Traditional parties, long comfortable in maintaining the status quo, now face a dilemma: either address the outrage or risk being swept aside by movements that will. The ruling elite, however, often miscalculates. They believe outrage can be managed with speeches, slogans, or token reforms, but this is not the kind of anger that dissipates with minor concessions. This is the kind of anger born from decades of promises broken and sacrifices demanded with nothing in return. Outrage grows when people see that the rules apply differently to the powerful than to everyone else. It grows when billionaires are praised for philanthropy while paying less in taxes than the workers they employ. It grows when politicians claim to represent the people but legislate in the interests of donors. The crazy part is that those in power often view this outrage as a threat, when in truth it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to rebuild trust, to realign policy with the needs of the many rather than the few, to correct decades of imbalance. But if ignored or repressed, outrage does not vanish, it multiplies. And every time someone shrugs off the anger of ordinary people as irrational or misguided, they miss the deeper reality. This outrage is not about envy, laziness, or confusion. It is about justice. It is about survival. And it is about the refusal of millions of people to quietly endure a system that exploits them while pretending to serve them. Here's a **600 word expansion of key point 5 **, written in a professional news-on politics style with rhetorical hooks and flowing paragraphs. The latest crisis did not so much create new problems as it exposed the cracks that were already running through our economic and political systems. The crazy part is how clearly those cracks are now visible to everyone, and yet those in power still insist that the system is sound. Each shock, whether financial, political, or social, strips away another layer of illusion, reminding us that what we are told is stability is, in reality, fragility. The narrative of a resilient economy or a strong democracy collapses the moment pressure is applied, revealing just how brittle and unequal the foundations truly are. Consider the recent pattern of crises. Each time, ordinary people are urged to stay calm, tighten their belts, and ride it out, while elites immediately secure lifelines for themselves. Banks are bailed out when they gamble recklessly, but families facing foreclosure are told it's their personal responsibility. Corporations plead for subsidies when profits dip, but workers demanding higher wages are labeled greedy or irresponsible. The double language of crisis management is stock. When the powerful falter, it is a systemic problem requiring collective rescue. When the powerless struggle, it is an individual failure requiring discipline. That contradiction is not hidden, it plays out in public, and it lays bare the deeper failure of a system built to protect wealth rather than people. Here's the hook. If a system only functions for the elite when things go wrong, does it really function at all? Stability that serves only a minority is not stability. It is privilege disguised as order. And every time a crisis reveals this truth, more people begin to question the legitimacy of the institutions around them. What good is a democracy where votes seem to matter less than donations? What good is an economy where growth benefits only those at the very top? These are not abstract questions. They are the questions being asked in kitchens, classrooms, and workplaces across the world. We also see how fragile our safety nets truly are. Public health systems were pushed to the brink, exposing years of underfunding and neglect. Supply chains buckled, revealing how dependent entire nations had become on corporate decisions made for profit, not resilience. Education systems strained to adapt, showing the lack of investment in infrastructure that should have been prioritized long before. None of these weaknesses were secrets. They were ignored until a crisis forced them into plain view. And still, rather than fixing these systemic flaws, the response too often has been to patch them temporarily and move on, as if the next shock will not arrive sooner than we think. And here's another hook. Crises are not accidents, they are stress tests. They reveal what a society values most. When trillions are mobilized overnight to stabilize financial markets, but not to ensure affordable housing or universal health care, we see the truth about priorities. When political leaders act with urgency to protect corporate profits but drag their feet on climate change, we see who holds real influence. Crises strip away the polite language of politics and economics and reveal, in stark terms, who matters and who does not. That revelation is both damning and dangerous, because once people see it, they cannot unsee it. The erosion of trust that follows is perhaps the most lasting consequence. Every time the public is told that sacrifices are necessary for the greater good, and then witnesses those sacrifices falling disproportionately on their shoulders, trust drains away. Once trust is lost, it is not easily rebuilt. Citizens begin to disengage from institutions they no longer believe in, or worse, they begin to resist them outright. And a society that loses faith in its institutions stands on shaky ground, vulnerable not only to further crises, but to instability that cannot be contained. What makes this moment so extraordinary and so dangerous is the convergence of multiple failures at once. Economic inequality, political corruption, environmental destruction, and social discontent are no longer isolated issues. They are intertwined, amplifying each other in ways that magnify the cracks in the system. And while leaders may treat each crisis as separate, ordinary people live them as a single, overwhelming reality. Rising rent is not separate from stagnant wages, polluted air is not separate from corporate lobbying, disillusionment with politics is not separate from the influence of money. Together, they form a web of systemic failures that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The crazy truth is that crises are no longer anomalies, they are becoming the norm. And with each one, the story is the same. Elites are shielded, the majority is exposed, and the system that claims to serve all is revealed to serve only a few. Every crisis, then, is both a moment of suffering and a moment of clarity. It shows us not only what is broken, but also who benefits from the brokenness. And if there is one thing these failures make clear, it is that the question we must ask is not whether the system can survive the next crisis, but whether it deserves to. Here's a *** 600 word expansion of key point 6 ** written in a professional news and politics style with hooks and flowing argumentation. Everywhere you look, citizens and workers are starting to recognize that what is often labeled as crazy disruption is in fact an opportunity. A call for change is echoing across societies, not as a whisper, but as a growing demand. And the crazy part is how determined people are becoming in the face of obstacles designed to silence them. We are seeing the slow unraveling of decades of resignation, the moment when individuals who once felt powerless realize that collective action can shake even the most entrenched systems. And that realization is powerful, because once people begin to believe change is possible, the structures built to convince them otherwise begin to tremble. Consider the new wave of labor organizing sweeping across industries, once thought immune to worker rebellion. Employees in retail, fast food, healthcare, and logistics sectors where unionization was written off as impossible are standing up, forming unions and striking for better pay and dignity. What's striking is not just the demands themselves, but the courage of workers facing companies armed with lawyers, lobbyists, and political influence. The hook is this: when a barista or a warehouse worker dares to confront a multi-billion-dollar corporation and wins, it sends a message far louder than any speech could deliver. If they can fight back, so can we. The call for change is not confined to the workplace. Communities are demanding accountability from political leaders who have long promised reforms but delivered little. Grassroots movements are organizing around climate justice, racial equity, healthcare, and education, connecting issues that were once treated as separate into a unified vision of systemic change. People are no longer satisfied with temporary fixes or symbolic gestures. They are asking for structural transformation. They are not saying, "Help us survive within this broken system." They are saying, "Let's build a new one that serves us all." That shift in mindset is seismic, and it is happening faster than elites can control. Here's another hook. Why is it that ideas once dismissed as radical suddenly resonate with millions? Universal health care, wealth taxes, tuition, free education, and serious climate action were once pushed to the margins of debate. Now they are mainstream demands, fueled by lived experience. People have seen the cost of doing nothing. They have seen loved ones go bankrupt from medical bills, students shackled with lifelong debt, families displaced by rising rents, and communities devastated by climate disasters. What was once abstract is now personal, and when injustice becomes personal, it sparks action that cannot easily be extinguished. This call for change is also generational. Young people, who will inherit the long-term consequences of today's failures, are refusing to accept the excuses of older political and corporate leaders. They are questioning capitalism itself, not just the policies that flow from it. They are organizing online, building networks across borders, and redefining what solidarity looks like in a digital age. To dismiss their anger as naive is a mistake, because history shows us that youth movements, armed with conviction and energy, have always been at the forefront of transformative change, yet the establishment continues to underestimate this shift. Leaders imagine that outrage can be managed, that calls for reform can be stalled, and that symbolic concessions will quiet the demand for deeper change. But this is not a passing wave of discontent. It is a tide that keeps rising. The more people experience inequality, injustice, and exclusion, the stronger their resolve becomes. And the crazy thing is, every attempt to suppress or dismiss their demands only strengthens the case for change. Silence is no longer an option when the reality of inequality is felt in every paycheck, every eviction notice, every medical bill, and every polluted breath. The most important thing to grasp is that this call for change is not driven by envy or resentment, as critics often claim. It is driven by a vision of fairness, dignity, and shared prosperity. Workers are not asking for handouts. They are asking for their rightful share of the wealth they create. Citizens are not asking for special treatment. They are demanding that governments live up to their promises of democracy and representation. This is not a politics of complaint. It is a politics of construction, a determination to build something better than the system that has failed so many for so long. The hook that should echo in every mind is this: when millions of ordinary people begin to believe in their collective strength, no system of power, no matter how entrenched, can remain unchallenged. The call for change is not just a reaction to injustice, it is a declaration of possibility. It is the refusal to accept a future dictated by elites, and the insistence that another future is not only necessary but achievable. What seemed unthinkable yesterday is becoming unavoidable today. That is the power of people united by a shared demand, not for survival within the old system, but for the creation of something entirely new. So I leave you with this: brace yourself, yes, but not out of fear. Brace yourself with courage, brace yourself with solidarity, because the truth is, the only way to confront this madness is together. And if history has taught us anything, it is that when ordinary people stand up, when they speak with one voice, they can turn the so-called crazy into a revolution of hope. Thank you.